Does that make the slider go up and down better? They should comment that there's sound then in a little bit. Maybe. The cord was out a little bit.
Oops.
Okay, take the tech hat off and put the pastor hat back on. I moved the computer this morning and apparently a cord pulled out that I didn't know about. Well, we were singing Trust and Obey and the words were up there, so they could still be humming along at home and they could sing it in whatever key they wanted to. So if we were singing it too low or too high, they could have sung it whatever key they wanted to, and the words changing told them how quickly we were singing. Proverbs 21 tonight. The wisdom of a plan. Was it bright there? Let's see. Must be, it's not too bad. The wisdom of a plan. There are all sorts of quotes about planning. Failing to plan is planning to fail, people say. That if you don't plan, you're planning to fail. And we're going to see that a little bit in the book of Proverbs. Now, the book of Proverbs, when we deal with wisdom literature in the Bible, tells us how things normally work. The Proverbs are not a guarantee, but the Proverbs are how things normally work. And there was one verse in particular that jumped out at me, and last week I did only one verse, and that was uncomfortable for me, so I thought instead of doing one verse, I'd go back through the Proverbs and see if there were other verses that spoke to the same type of idea. And so we're just going to jump through Proverbs 21 and see a couple of verses on the wisdom of a plan. First of all, verse 5, one of my favorite verses in the book of Proverbs. I think it's years ago when we memorized a verse from every book of the Bible. This is the one that I chose for the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 21:5, the thoughts of the diligent tend only to plenteousness, but of everyone that is hasty only to want. So the wisdom of a plan, what type of plans do we need to have? Proverbs 21:5, a plan to succeed. Now, this is not health, wealth, and prosperity gospel. This is not, well, if you give it to God, then everything you do is going to turn to gold. It's like the Midas touch. Remember, the Proverbs are how things often work. And you could say, well, I know someone that was really diligent and they ended up broke. This is how things normally work. I knew someone that was lazy and they ended up rich. This is how things normally work. So, a plan to succeed. There is a wisdom in having a plan to succeed. Of everyone that is hasty only to want, we have a modern expression for that half of the proverb, and that's haste makes waste. One of the mechanics that I watch, he often says, I like my job so much, I do it twice. Sometimes because he was in a hurry and did something out of order or forgot a step. Other times because he got a bad part and he put it in and had to take it out, put in another part. When I was doing the timing belt on the van, Benjamin was standing there and he goes, are you supposed to put that on now? And I said, yeah, I think so. I got it all put on, and I think I got 2 more pieces put on. I went to put on the next thing that I thought went on, and it had to go underneath the stuff that I had already put on. Haste makes waste. But the same thing, haste makes waste, which leads to want. Diligence and the thoughts of the diligent lead to plenty. What type of thoughts does a diligent have? Well, the diligent makes a plan and then follows through on that plan. That's what diligence is figuring out how to do something and doing it. Making a plan and following it through. On the other side of that, down in verse 25, it tells us, the desire of the slothful killeth him, for his hands refuse to labor. There's a lot of those verses in the Proverbs talking about the lazy man will starve to death because he won't lift his hand up with his food. You say, well, that's silly. Why wouldn't you pick your hand up with your food? It's a very vivid picture. I don't think I've ever seen someone so lazy that they wouldn't pick up their hand with the food that was in front of them. But I have seen some very lazy things in my life. At our Bible college, they had open dorm nights where the Center Lounge was open on Friday and Saturday nights, or just Friday nights, something like that. And I was once in a girls' dorm on that open area on a Friday night, and I watched girls stick their faces into a pan of something. Were they too lazy to go get a spoon or a fork or something? Or I just imagine maybe that's how they behaved most of the time, and they didn't notice that a guy was there. Or maybe I was just discounted because I didn't count as a guy and it was fine. I've seen some lazy things. I've seen even lazier things in guys' dorms, but that one's funnier to me. But the slothful doesn't have a plan. The slothful doesn't execute the plan. The desire of the slothful killeth him. He wants something, but he won't lift his finger to get it. But that describes a lot of people in our world. There's a lot of people that are failing because they just won't lift a hand to do anything about it. The wisdom of a plan. It's wise to have a plan to succeed. And this isn't I had a friend in high school that as a ninth grader, he signed his name thousands of times. And whenever we asked him what he was doing, he said, "Damon, what are you doing?" He goes, "I'm working on my corporate executive signature." You're a freshman in high school. What do you mean your corporate executive signature? He goes, "It has to be just right." And this kid polished his signature. I remember all through ninth grade, his signature was all over everything. I'm not saying we need to be, I'm going to be a wealthy executive someday. Last I knew, that ninth grader that signed his name on dozens of things, he made a plan, and he ended up there. He actually signs multi-million-dollar deals on a regular basis. I don't know that they would have cared that his signature looks the way it looked, or if it looks like any of our signatures would look. But he had a plan. And it's not that, boy, we're going to be the most successful at what we do, but we need to have a plan to succeed. Verse 11, when the scorner is punished, the simple is made wise. And when the wise is instructed, he receiveth knowledge. There's a plan there. Well, see, I already came to these verses looking for plans, so you might not have seen a plan there if you weren't looking for a plan, but I see a plan to learn and grow. You know, if you don't take instruction, you won't learn. But if you make a plan to receive instruction, when you get instruction, you do something about it. Sometimes, some people, when they hear instruction, well, you know, that could have been improved if you do this. No. Okay, well, that's not a plan to learn and grow. Other people will look and say, whoa, you got a better result than I do when doing that. How did you get a better result? And they're mentally taking notes or maybe physically taking notes. Well, the Bible says that those with a plan to learn and grow are wise. Verse 11, the scorner is punished, the simple is made wise. When the scorner is punished, the simple is made wise. The simple watches someone else's punishment and learns from it. That's a plan to learn and grow from someone else's mistake. Ever see people that refuse to learn and grow from someone else's mistake and they have to make that same mistake themselves? Welcome to being a parent. But that's okay. I was the same way when I was a kid. I did not learn from what my siblings learned. I had to learn it myself because that's the best way to learn, right? A wise person has a plan to learn and grow. They will learn from the mistakes of others. The second part of verse 11 says, when the wise is instructed, he receiveth knowledge. He has a plan to learn from his own mistakes. If he's missing something, when he is instructed, he grows wiser still because he has a plan to learn. It's real easy to look at other people and say, you don't know what you're talking about. They don't know what they're talking about. I've already got this all figured out. The wise has a plan to learn and grow from the mistakes of others and from his own mistakes. Verse 12 as well tells us, the righteous man wisely considereth the house of the wicked. Wisely considereth the house of the wicked, but God overthroweth the wicked for their wickedness. See, the wise man will look at the house of the wicked, at how the wicked is doing, and he'll interpret it right. Some will look and say, well, look at how well they're doing. Look at the success they're having in this area. They've got something I want. And the righteous man will consider that wisely and go, I might want what they have, but I'm not going to get it the way they got it. The right interpretation of events, because the wise man knows the wicked has a future that he does not want. And the verse that set me down this path, verse 16, the man that wandereth out of the way of understanding shall remain in the congregation of the dead. When I read that this morning, I promise you, I have never seen that proverb before. However, having read through the Bible several times and read through the book of Proverbs several more times than I've read through the Bible even, I know I've read that verse, but I look at it and I go, well, that's an interesting verse. That sounds like, that's just weird. The man that wandereth out of the way of understanding shall remain in the congregation of the dead. Now, the remain in the congregation of the dead, you think, what, congregation of the dead? Just in a group of dead people. What it's talking about is the man that wandereth out of the way of understanding, the man that doesn't follow God's wisdom is going to end up in the congregation of the dead. Eternal punishment. He's not going to walk in the path of light. So in Psalm 21:16 or Proverb 21:16, there's a plan to follow God. Do you know, no one accidentally wanders into righteousness. No one accidentally wanders into spiritual growth. No one accidentally wanders into following God. Specifically, this verse tells us that wandering leads to death. You don't wander into salvation. Because if we wander, we have these other verses in Proverbs, like Proverbs 14:12, there is a way. Anyone know that verse? There is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the ends thereof are the ways of death. Because if we wander, we're going to go with what's right to us. Proverbs 21:2 says, every way of a man is right in his own eyes. You won't find people that say, well, what I want to do is wrong. Well, they might. But most of the time, they've got their justification for what they're doing, and in their eyes, it seems like the right path. Wandering leads to death. You don't wander into salvation. But generically, that same principle applies. You won't wander into spiritual growth either. The wisdom of a plan, it's good to have a plan to follow God. You don't wander into growth. You make a plan to grow. Enlist help to grow. You just step by step. What do I need to do to get there? If I want to be here, boy, I've read of that great hero of the faith. I'd like what they have. Well, if you want what they have, you need to do what they did. I was reading in Exodus today, and I always love the passage on manna. Because every time I read that, when the Hebrews saw it, the Israelites saw it, they said manna. The Bible I was reading out of this morning has the little notes in the bottom. It says a little footnote there. And you look down and it says, manna means, what is it? Because they didn't know what it was. So they looked on the ground and they said, what is it? And so for 40 years in the desert, they ate, what is it? I love that. That's a great passage. And it gets better. Because God tells them to go out and collect. And it says that they're supposed to collect a homer, not the guy from the cartoon from several years ago, a homer, a tenth of an ephah, I think it is, for each person in their house every morning. And after the dew leaves, there's these wafers, and they're like coriander, and they taste like honey. Was that what it was? They taste like, I think. And they're these sweet wafers. And said, he that collected a lot didn't have too much, and he that collected a little didn't have too little. Everyone had a homer a person. And they're like, well, that's really cool. That's just like magic. It's like everyone had what they needed. And then they were told not to keep any until morning. And even though everyone had a homer apiece, and that was what a person should have been eating in a day, some people had some left over and they kept it overnight. You remember what happened to it? It stunk and had worms on it by morning. Now, if you leave food out, you don't get worms on it instantly. You don't get maggots on it instantly because flies have to lay their eggs. Those eggs have to hatch, and then the maggots come out. Then you got maggots. It's not an instant thing, but it was for manna. Instantly, they knew. God said, eat it all that day. Don't leave any left over. The next day, stink and worms. How many people kept manna overnight after that? Probably not very many. That's one of those major things. A Facebook friend, I think it's someone Jen went to school with, out in Arizona, I think it was out in Arizona, was looking for a stench in her house and found a partially decomposed protein bite in the couch or something like that had been sitting there for a while. She said, that smell just got worse and worse, and I finally figured out it was in one spot in the house, and I went digging for it. When I dug it out, it smelled awful. Just imagine the Israelites that kept manna overnight. That's what they experienced. Instead of this coriander thing that tasted like honey, it was worms and stunk. And then you come to the sixth day where God says, collect twice as much today. Now, the people that had been trusting God right along and doing what he said probably went, okay. The people that saved manna overnight probably went, I did that once. I'm not going to do that again because that stunk. And the Bible says that on the seventh day, people went out to collect manna because they hadn't collected enough the sixth day and there was none there. And those that had kept it overnight, it was still fresh the next day. Well, how can manna go bad overnight, stink and have worms one day, and then another day it's perfectly fine? Because God's in control. God has it all worked out. And God was teaching his people to trust him day by day. So that when God says, take only what you need, that's what they did. When God said, take 2 days worth, that's what they did. And when God said, you don't have water, this is what you need to do, that's what they did. When God said, hey, the Amalekites are coming against you, this is what you need to do, that's what they did. And God was teaching them to trust day by day. Their spiritual growth was written by God, ordained by God, orchestrated by God, so that he got them to the place that they needed to be in to follow him. We need to have a plan to follow God. Now, God's got a plan to grow us in our faith. We trust him and we take it step by step and go with him. But a plan to follow God. You won't wander into growth. You won't wander into salvation. And then Proverbs 21:17, he that loveth pleasure shall be a poor man. He that loveth wine and oil shall not be rich. You know, there are people that take that as a great mantra. They're like, you know what? I'm going to live for the day. I'm just going to do what feels good. I don't know why I don't ever have any money. Proverbs encourages us a plan to save. Now, there's a plan to save, and there's a plan to provide for my needs. If I'm making a plan to provide for my needs, I'm trying to take God's job. But at the same time, God says it's wise to have a plan to save. How do I know when I've crossed the line? Well, I cross the line when I'm trusting my work and what I'm doing and not God. But if I'm saving and trusting God, there's a wisdom to that. Seeking pleasure leads to poverty. Seeking pleasure leads to poverty because there's no delayed gratification or planning. See people that wear that as a badge of honor. They're like, there's $36.83 in my checking account, and I just ordered from Grubhub $36.78. I've got 5 cents left. And they're like, go me. Like, well, how many days till payday? Well, just 3. It's just 3 till you have money to do anything with. but you really need that $36 of delivered food. That's not a plan to save, that's a plan to seek pleasure. And he that loveth pleasure shall be a poor man. He that loveth wine and oil shall not be rich. Now there's no great honor to being rich, biblically speaking. But we do read, if we look down at verse 20, there is treasure to be desired in oil in the dwelling of the wise. It's interesting. It doesn't say there's treasure to be had and oil in the dwelling of the rich. It's in the dwelling of the wise. Why? Because as opposed to the wise, verse 20 says, but a foolish man spendeth it up. The wise saves and doesn't spend it all up. Say, well, okay, so I have all these plans, and there are people that say, well, I'm planning to save, but you don't know how bad the economy is. I do. Solomon might not have known how bad the economy was. He grew up in the king's house, and he was king, and he was like the wisest, wealthiest man of his day. So maybe he didn't know what he was talking about. But having a plan to save doesn't always mean that you're going to save. Remember in the Dave Ramsey material, he goes, people make a plan to save, and they find out that as soon as they make a plan to save, there's an emergency this month, and then there's an emergency next month, and some months, it takes them 3 or 4 months to be able to set anything aside. He goes, but they're still making progress because they've got a plan. The truth we see in the Bible is it doesn't point out, but even though you won't reach your plan, the Bible points out you'll rarely go beyond your plan. If you don't have a plan, you'll get it. People say, I want to shoot for the, shoot for the stars? No, shoot for the moon. Because at least if I fail, I'll be among the stars. Although if you fall short of the moon, you're not going to be among the stars. You'll just be in space and without oxygen, but that's okay. You may not reach your plan, but you'll rarely go beyond your plan. Proverbs tells us there's a wisdom to having a plan to succeed, being diligent, a plan to learn and grow, to learn from mistakes, yours and other people's, a plan to follow God, because wandering leads to the congregation of death, and a plan to save.